Early that fall, when this project was still just a dream, I drew something. This drawing is basically the ender of the video, which is unbelievable, because I didn't know about this spot when I drew it. And if you think about it, it's not granted that you'll ever find a bridge on which you can build a jump, because bridges have traffic. But this particular bridge was out of use during that winter, so it was just full of untouched snow. So now we're talking about a video called Relativity, and in that video this clip is not actually like this. It looks like this. And now we'll see how it all came about. The whole project started from thinking about what could be done with a motorized slider. You know, a rail along which the camera moves by itself. You can repeat the exact same camera move over and over again, and even choose the speed of that move. It follows that with quite simple editing, it should be possible to create scenes where the camera moves, but still there are things on screen whose time passes at different speeds. It was fascinating as an idea, because it seemed so complicated to pull off, but yet not impossible. So I got myself a slider. My slider had 100 different options for speed. I taped marks on the rail and I clocked the slider at different speeds, because I wanted a complete table, which would help me later to know the exact right settings to shoot a scene with. The catch is that the speed of the slider and the frame rate of the camera may vary, but their ratio must be constant. That way the number of frames per each centimeter will remain same. And that's when your shots will match together perfectly. So let's go back to that bridge. We had a camera and the slider on the next bridge. This far away from the object, the camera movement is not very significant, but the railing of the bridge brings some depth to the scene. So this trick was filmed with the slider moving fast, 61.5 millimeters per second to be exact. And since the camera shot 50 frames per second, the slider moved 1.23 millimeters between each frame. So then when it was time to shoot a time-lapse of the traffic, the slider was set to move the same 1.23 millimeters between each photo. Of course, that movement was now much slower, because when shooting this time-lapse, each photo was exposed for a few seconds, so that the lights of the cars are drawn in the picture in these long arcs. Finally, after the time-lapse, it was time to pack up and go home. But the annoying part was, we still couldn't know whether this shot would work or not. You always found that out at the editing table. There, the jump and the time-lapse were thrown on a timeline and synchronized. Then you'd do some masking. That's choosing which part of the image is the time-lapse and which is the video. And after that, you were finally able to celebrate a successful shot, if it was one. So, this is the basic principle behind the whole video. Now, let's cover the first real trick of the video, which is this backyard line during which the snowmen are built. But let's pay attention to this previous close-up of the backflip. First, check out the focus that catches right at the beginning of the jump. I mean, in this clip, one 5-year-old and one 8-year-old were using the camera. Their task was to press the button at the right time so that the focus transition hits the spot. And it did. Second, listen to how good those crunching branches sound. I mean, like too good. That sound was recorded in our dressing room. And by the way, that same recording studio was also used for the sound effects for the mounting of the bindings. Which is a shot that involves quite a few tricks. First of all, I have to point out that this is not necessarily a good example of how to mount your bindings. We took some artistic freedom to make it look nice. Here, instead of a time-lapse, we have stop-motion animation combined with a regular video. In stop-motion animation, you take a single image manually after each small work step. For example, I took one picture after each hole I drilled, and with a slider you can have your camera move after each photo. During the operation, it was important that the skis would stay in place. That's why the layout actually looked like this. In other words, during the editing phase, removing those planks was quite a big deal. And looking back, I should have been a little more precise right from the start. For example, those reflections of the plank caused way too much trouble later on. In the end, it was quite a complicated pile of different masks to get to this end result. And even though I was using proxies, this shot made my computer cry. This is one of my favorites in the video. Here my brain loves the fact that the focus is not in the skier. And also the movement of the camera is strongly present here. We saw this spot when we were scouting things for episode 19. At the time we put it in the maybe pile. But in the spring, when the snow started to melt, I saw a new opportunity here with that stone wall. By the way, this is the only spot of the video that I shot completely alone, and I went there by bike. One of the best things in this clip is the sound effect. It was the last thing I added to the whole video just before the release. You know, melting snow may not actually sound like anything in real life. So this sound is the sound of frying in oil on a pan. In this shot we have a super slow motion combined with real-time video. And I have to admit that I didn't realize that such a strong slow motion would lose the movement of the camera. Because in the end the move is so slow that you won't even see it. So we filmed this in a complicated way with the slider, even though basically the same end result would have been easily obtained if the camera had been completely stationary the whole time. After building the rainbow, we lifted it on top of the van. Up there it suddenly seemed a little higher and steeper than it should have been. When we drove the van in traffic, we definitely got some attention. But anyway, Ali was our stunt driver and he sure didn't pull this off first try. But oh boy, it was beautiful when it happened.
Woo!
So what we did was we first shot the driving act and then we left the car right there and filmed the trick separately. In post-production this shot was quite the task since the rainbow is moving right past me in the frame. And you know, I actually wanted to have a couple of these difficult to edit shots. And as it turns out we ended up having loads of them in post, but this one was actually a conscious choice. The others were surprises. One of those surprises was this double backflip, which when it comes to filming came almost as if on a tray, because we had built this jump in front of our terrace so that my friend Sakari could do his first backflip, which he did by the way. But also I wanted to shoot long time lapses from day to night or night to day, but I didn't really want to spend a night at some spot overseeing the camera. So I then realized I could just make this jump more poppy and shoot the nighttime time-lapses from my own terrace. However, in post-production this was quite tricky. I thought that when shooting the trick in daylight against the sky, the background could be easily removed with just a few clicks. And probably someone else could, but not me. Instead, I got COVID, and one of my quarantine pastimes was to manually remove the sky frame by frame in Photoshop. The day to night time-lapse was interesting because you can't just leave your camera to shoot by itself. Because the exposure changes quite drastically between day and night, ND filters and camera settings need to be changed quite frequently. And even after that, straight out of the camera, the time-lapse looks like this. So it was a lot of work to make it smooth. After all, this shot turned out alright, but I'd say it's certainly not the most beautiful shot in the video. Then we have these nighttime adventures under the stars. Unlike the double back, these things were fully shot at night. Astrophotography was a new thing for me, and it was quite exciting to experiment with it. The key is to go somewhere so far away that there's as little light pollution as possible. So we drove far away and did our thing once again. We shot some action on video and we took a time lapse and we blended those together. Personally, I'm proud of this branch at the bottom right here, because in reality it was not a branch at all, but a leg of a tripod. See, you couldn't really get this camera movement without having the tripod in the frame. So I simply drew this silhouette on top of it, and it works perfect. The sunrise was a must-have for the video. The biggest challenge was to find a spot where the sun and the trick could fit in the same composition. This spot was a funny discovery because it's actually the exact same spot where we filmed some of the dumbbell tricks for Newton's laws. We just have the cameras facing now towards this abandoned building. No slider was used here. This was filmed with 2 stationary cameras, which were placed right next to each other. Notice the slight change in perspective between the 2. One was used to shoot the jumps and the other took a time-lapse of the sunrise at the same time. We did it this way because it was hard to tell beforehand how long the beautiful part of the sunrise would last. Also, we were scared that the light would be quite different if the jump was filmed only after the time-lapse. Here, both the original video and the time-lapse were filmed with a 4:3 aspect ratio and with such a high resolution that in post we had plenty of room to crop and move the image. The post-production was far from easy in this case. Again, we didn't take everything into account in advance. Of course, the jump clip had these huge lens flares, which didn't really match the moving flares of the time-lapse. I had to first remove all the flares and then animate my own flares on top of everything. And just like the day-to-night time-lapse, this time-lapse was quite a trick in itself. Janne and I had discussed if we should use the aperture to change the exposure or not. And we ended up using it quite a lot instead of ND filters, because it was faster. But we didn't realize it affects the number of rays coming from the sun in the end result. As you can see, they jump around here and there. My brother and I had built the landing the evening before. And since the night was very cold, at sunrise the whole spot was quite icy. We threw some snow on it in the morning, but there wasn't much time to really make a difference. In other words, the drop made me scared, and the landing threw me forward with some serious speed. I stopped just at this low edge, behind which there would have been a further drop of a few meters. Luckily, I didn't go that far. To close things off, I will ask you one question. There's this clip in the end credits where the camera flashes on me. Do you now understand how this was created? Thanks for stopping by, thanks for listening, and have a great day.